All right, so in this next video, we're continuing with talking about solving multi-step equations. However, in this next part, we're going to amp up the intensity, and we're going to applying the distributive property now. So we're looking at those with the distributive property. Okay, with the distributive property, but we're still limiting it to one side. So we'll have variables on one side. Okay, so we're applying the distributive property, but variables are going to be on one side, but we're still following the same steps, okay? Step number 1, apply the distributive property if necessary. Step number 2, combine like terms on each side if necessary. Step number 3, pick your number and variable side. And then once you have your number and variable side, we have to isolate the variable, get it by itself by applying the inverse operations. And then, of course, we can check our answer. So remember, the goal is by the 4th video, we want to be able to solve this guy here, okay? We're not quite there yet, but we want to be able to solve it. Now, notice I have 4 questions here besides number 2 there, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to do 3, 4, and 5, and then we'll save number 6 when we can work on it together in class, okay? So let's work on number 3 here. So step number 1, apply the distributive property. Can I apply it? Yes, I have this parentheses. I can multiply 8 to each term on the inside, okay? So we can apply the distributive property here. 88 is going to stay the same. And I have 8 times v. Well, 8 times v is 8v. 8 times a positive 4. 8 times 4 is 32. Okay, so step number 1, we took care of distributive property. Step number 2, can I combine like terms? No, I can't put a variable with the number, so there's nothing to combine. However, notice what situation we're in. We're in a 2-step equation, okay? So that's step number 3, pick a variable side and a number side. Let's keep v here and move all the numbers to the left side and treat it like a 2-step equation, okay? So remember, in 2-step equations, it's kind of the opposite of order of operations. We take care of the addition, subtraction part first and move that number furthest away from the variable to the other side, okay, to the number side, so we put all the numbers together. Now, how we do that is we have to apply the inverse operation, so that's step number 4. What's the inverse of adding 32? Subtracting 32. So we're going to subtract 32 from both sides, apply that subtraction property of equality, okay, and we have 8 minus 2, we get 6, and 8 minus 3 is 56, right? And then, of course, on this side, the inverses cancel out. So what I'm left with is 56 is equal to 8v. Now remember, we still have to isolate v, get it by itself. What does it mean if I have 8 next to v? It's 8 times v. So to undo that, the inverse would be divide by 8 to both sides, and that would move my 8 to my number side. Okay, so my inverses cancel out. 56 divided by 8, 7, and I get 7 is equal to v. Okay, so let's check to see if we're right. Let's plug in 7 into our v and see if that's what we get. 88 on both sides, okay? So the left side will still be the same here. 88 is equal to 8 times, we're replacing v with 7 plus 4. So now that we're actually trying to see if we're correct, now we go back to applying the order of operations. I have a parentheses. Let's take care of what's in the parentheses first. Well, 7 plus 4 is 11. So we get 88 is equal to 8 times 11. And then 8 times 11, we get 88. So are we correct? Yes. Okay, so that's number 3. Number 4, again, same pattern here. Can I apply the distributive property? Yes, but be careful here. Sometimes students forget to apply this sign with it. We're not multiplying a 5 to each term. We're multiplying a negative 5 to each term, okay? So the 4m will stay the same, and then we'll multiply my negative 5. What's a negative 5 times 7? Different sign, I get a negative. 5 times 7 is 35. And then, of course, keep the variable, m. Then I would have a negative 5 times a negative 5. 2 negatives make a positive. 5 times 5 is 25, okay? So now, step number 2, can I combine like terms? Yeah, I have variables I can put together, right? 4m minus 35m. Well, different sign, what do? Subtract, right? 35 minus 4 is 31. I keep my variable. Which one's bigger, 4 or the 35? 35, so I'm going to keep its sign, which is negative. So I get a negative 31m plus 25 is equal to 211. So then, notice we're in a two-step equation now. Step number 3, pick your variable side, pick your number side. Let's keep m here and move all the numbers here just like we would in a two-step equation. And again, just like a two-step equation, we got to move the number over. In this case, we got to move the plus 25 first. So what's the inverse of adding 25? Subtract 25 to move it to the other side. And we get negative 31m. Inverse cancels out is equal to, well, subtracting this, go back to our elementary days. Can't subtract that, so I borrow. Change it to 11, and I get 6. 0 minus 2, can't do that, so I borrow. Changes this to a 10. 10 minus 8, we get 8. And then 1, right? So I get negative 31 is equal to 186. Now, on this next part, I'm going to use a calculator, but just to save us some time, but you can do the same thing too. We have a number next to a variable, which implies what? Multiplication. So to move it to the number side, I got to divide by negative 31 to both sides, my division property of equality, so that my inverses cancel out, and I get m is equal to 186 divided by a negative 31. Different sign, I get a negative, and then when you divide, we get 6. Okay, so m is equal to a negative 6. Okay, now checking it, that would be important here. I'm going to try to write it small enough so we can check it on the side, but we're going to plug in negative 6 in for each m. Okay, so we'd have 4 times a negative 6 minus 5 times 7 times a negative 6. So don't get confused with the parentheses. All I'm using the parentheses for is to say we have 7 times that. Okay, minus 5 equals 211. So if we're doing it right here, we should get 211 on the left side. Okay, so order of operations, take care of what's in the parentheses first. Notice I have 7 times a negative 6. A positive times a negative makes a negative, and 7 times 6 is 42. So I'm going to just do this one step at a time here. We have 4 times the negative 6 minus 5, and then that negative 42 minus 5 equals 211. Still taking care of the parentheses. What's a negative 42 minus 5? Well, same sign, add and keep. 42 plus 5 is 47, and keep the sign, which is negative. So this guy stays the same, and now I have negative 47. Okay, now applying the order of operations, we took care of parentheses. There's no exponents. Multiplying and dividing left or right. So I have 4 times a negative 6. Positive times a negative is a negative. 4 times 6 is 24. Okay. Then I also have a negative 5 times a negative 47 here. Okay. 2 negatives make a positive, and 5 times 47, and you could do it out to the side, but I'm just going to tell you what it is to save some time here. We get 235 is equal to 211. Now I have addition left to right, so I have different sign. Okay, so we have to subtract and keep the sign larger. So let's subtract these guys. Okay, 5 minus 4 is 1, 3 minus 2 is 1, and then I get 211, right? 235 is bigger and it's positive, so I get a positive 211 equals 211. Is that what we wanted? Yeah, so my answer is correct. M equals a negative 6. All right, last one we'll work on together here. So now we're ramping up the intensity. I still have variables on one side, but notice I can apply the distributive property twice. So on step number 1 here, we're actually going to apply it twice. So I'm going to multiply 5 times r to get 5r, 5 times a negative 3 to get negative 15. And then not only can I do that once, I can also do that with the 8. Now, one thing I want to point out here, if this is a negative, let's say it were negative, don't forget to include the sign. We would multiply a negative 8 to each term, okay? However, we don't have a negative here, we have a positive. So I have a positive 8 times 1, which is a positive 8, so plus 8. Then 8 times a negative 2r, a positive times a negative makes a negative. 8 times 2 is 16, and then I keep my r, okay, is equal to negative 51. Okay, so step number 1, apply the distributive property. Step number 2, combine like terms. Notice I can put my r's together. They have a different sign. One is positive, one is negative. What do you do with different sign? Subtract and keep the sign larger. 16 minus 5, what do we get? 11. 16 is bigger and it's negative, so I get a negative 11r when I combine those two together. Minus 15 plus 8 equals negative 51. Now, double check here. Can I still combine like terms? Yes, I can put my numbers together. And again, we have different signs, so we subtract and keep the sign larger. 15 minus 8, what do I get? Okay, 7. And since 15 is bigger and it's negative, our answer would be negative 7 when we combine like terms there. There we go. Okay, so combining my like terms, now I'm done with that step. Going to step number 3, pick a variable side, pick a number side. We have r on the left. Let's keep it left and put all the numbers on the right side. Notice it's a two-step equation, so I just got to move that minus 7 over. Okay, what's the opposite of minus 7? Add 7. Do the opposite, the inverse, to both sides. My inverse cancels out, and I get a negative 11r is equal to, what's a negative 51? A negative 51 plus 7, okay? Well, again, we have different signs here, right? We have different signs. So what do we do when we have different signs? We subtract and keep the sign of the larger. 51 minus 7, we get 44. There we go. And then because 51 is bigger, we're going to keep it signed, which is negative. Now remember, if we have a number next to a variable that implies multiplication, we got to do the inverse to isolate it. So I divide by a negative 11 to both sides. And I get r is equal to, same sign when I divide, negative divided by a negative makes a positive. 44 divided by 11, we get 4. Okay, so I get r is equal to 4. So now we want to check, plugging it back in to each r, this r and this r, and I'm going to write it out to the side. We get 5 times 4 minus 3 plus 8 times 1 minus 2, and then 2 times r, right? So we'd have 2 times 4. And we want to see if that's equal to a negative 51. Okay. Well, applying the order of operations here, let's take care of what's in the parentheses. On the first parentheses, I have 4 minus 3, which is 1, right? Plus 8 times. The second parentheses, I got to follow the order of our operations even inside the parentheses. Multiplication first, 2 times 4, we get to 8. So I have 1 minus 8. Okay. Now I still have a parentheses that isn't completely finished. So what's 1 minus 8? Well, remember we have different signs here. So what do? Subtract and keep the sign larger. 8 minus 1 is 7. Which one is bigger, 8 or 1? 8, and it's negative, so I get a negative 7 equals a negative 51. Now, we're done with the parentheses part because we're down to just one number in the parentheses. Checking exponents, no exponents. So now I'm done. I'm down to multiplication and division from left to right. So remember, if we have one number in the parentheses, we're talking about multiplication. 5 times 1, we get 5. And then 8 times a negative 7. Okay, well, what's a positive times a negative? Negative. Now, we could put plus a negative, but there's really no need to do that because when we add a negative, all we're doing is subtracting. So I'm going to just put minus, and then 8 times 7 is 56. Okay. So now, again, looking at these guys, we have different signs, addition, subtraction, left to right. What do I do with different signs? Subtract. 56 minus 5 is 51. Is 5 bigger or 56? 56, and it's negative, so I get negative 51. Is that what we wanted? Yeah. So my answer is r equals 4.